In the year 2000, the world religious population broke down something like this. About a third of the world's population, right? So about 2000, it's slightly over 6 billion people. A third of them were Christians, right? So 2 billion people. Almost a quarter were Muslims, a little bit over 1 billion. Almost a billion Hindus, about half that, Buddhists, and then you have a breakdown from other things. In the other category, here you see other, 3%, that would include groups like Judaism. Right? That's not in this list. Jews, about like 0.22% of the world's population. Right? Judaism is very small, but it's had a large impact. It would also include groups like Sikhism, Jainism, two other Indian religions that have spread throughout the world, Shinto, which is Japanese religion. And then you have this category of non-religious at about 14%. Probably a better term would be unaffiliated, because not everybody in that 14% would be non-religious. They'd probably refer to themselves as spiritual, but not involved in an institutional religion. Certainly in that group you would also have atheists, but non-religious is not the best term. Though certainly in places like China and other places, there would be a non-affiliation. So that's the world population around 2000. 10 years later, the breakdown is different. Some of the numbers, the percentages, seem to be similar, but when you think about our world population being over 7 billion now, that some of these numbers have profound effect. The world population of Christians down about 2%. Still the largest group. Now remember, we're using Christian very broadly. I don't know. Christian here would probably include, this is a Pew Research, would probably include Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, which other Christian groups might not necessarily look at as Christian because of some of the beliefs about Jesus and things like that. But, about still almost a third, but less. There's still probably about 2.5 billion Christians in the world, again, broadly. Islam has increased about 1%, so still around 1.5 billion, almost 2 billion. Same population of Hindus, Buddhists a little higher. In this case, Jews are broken out. Other religions, you might not be able to read this, but again, Jains, Sikhs, Dalits, Baha'is, and others. Folk religionists would be followers of traditional religions, so African traditional religions, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders. That's what it means by folk religionists. So what's the trend? Well, the trend is decline for Christianity, right? Rise of Islam, decline for Christianity. Also, an increase in the unaffiliated. Now, again, that's an increase in atheists, yes, but it's also an increase in people who don't affiliate with a specific tradition. Some groups have referred to them, not Pew. Pew uses unaffiliated, but other groups, when they're doing surveys, refer to them as the nuns. N-O-N-E-S, not nuns that wear the habit that work in the Catholic Church. Nuns as in, what's your religion? None. All right, none of the above kind of thing. So unaffiliated or the nuns, again, some are atheists, some still have notions of spirituality, might believe in God, but there's still this kind of increase of people that don't affiliate with the religion. Now, one of the things that's interesting, this kind of other religions is made up of Jains, Sikhs, other groups. Jews broken out here, but there's actually more Sikhs than there are Jews in the world. There's about 15 million Jews in the world, about half in the United States, the other half mostly in Israel. There's about 20 to 25 million Sikhs in the world. Yet it's Jews that are broken out, right? But Jews have had, in Western culture, a large impact on Western culture through Christianity, through Islam, and through Jewish thinking as well. So within that 10 years, you see some percentage change, a decrease in the percentage identifying as Christian. Where are Christians located? Right? The red here is indicative of Christians, right? Where people identify as Christians, or where the majority is Christian. Now you'll see some are darker than others. That's not a trick of the light. That's instead to represent, the ones that are darker have a higher percentage of Christians. The ones that are lighter, it's still a majority Christian country, but it is, there are other groups. So the red are Christian. The green here is Islam, right? Highest proportion in Southeast Asia. The largest Islamic country is not in the Middle East, it's Indonesia. And a third of the world's Muslims live in Southeast Asia. But then, of course, you see, in the Middle East, Africa, a few small places in some other countries there. And then the other group here is the unaffiliated. And so China here, a couple of European countries that are predominantly unaffiliated. Now that partly might have to do in China with a couple of things, right? If you're officially taking this survey, you're going to tell the communist government, right, I'm unaffiliated. But also, followers of traditional Chinese things like Taoism or Confucianism wouldn't necessarily look at what they're doing as practicing religion. And so that might be a reason for the skew there. So you kind of get a picture here now of where people identify as predominantly Christian, places where they identify predominantly as Muslims. But, there's a difference between a country being predominantly Christian and where Christians are located. Where are today, or at least 2010, I guess is when, 2012, sorry. Where are Christians predominantly located? Right? This would be something you really want to get. Christians predominantly today are located in the global south. People below the equator. Now, yes, population-wise, Europe has the most, but when you think about people below the equator, that's where a large proportion of people are. It's Christianity in the global south. That's where Christianity is growing. North America and Europe, Christianity is on the decline, population-wise. We'll talk more about that on Monday and talk about some of the, what kind of Christianity, why is it growing there, some of those kind of things. But if you see, like the breakdown here, you might not be able to read these numbers. About 12% of the world's Christians are in North America. Almost a quarter are in Latin America. A little bit over a quarter in Europe. And right around a quarter in sub-Saharan Africa. Remember, this section in here is kind of mostly Muslim. Although there's a couple countries that are part Muslim, part Christian, which has led to a lot of problems. And then about 13% in Asia. So almost half the world's Christians live below the equator. Another chart just to kind of give you an idea here. You might not be able to make those numbers out. It looks better on the office. But when you look at this chart, right, top 10 countries with the largest number of Christians, right, the United States sits at the top, because about 78% of the United States identifies as Christian. And remember, it's going to be a very broad term. But when you start looking at the next countries, Brazil, Mexico, even Russia, the Philippines, Nigeria, China, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it's not until we get down to, let's see, number 9, that we finally get to a European country. Where we had spent a lot of our time, the first part of this class, talking about Christianity in Europe. And now, right? You have Latin American countries, Russia and Asian country, right? Southeast Asia, Africa, East Asia, Africa again, and then number 10, Africa again. And the other thing as well is that for these top 10 countries, they represent almost half of the Christian population. Again, you might not be able to make this out, but a billion Christians live in these top 10 countries. The rest of the world makes up that other billion. On the other hand, to kind of give you an idea, the spread of Islam, where are Muslims located? Okay. Large section, this says 60% in Asia, the Asia-Pacific region. So 60% of Muslims there, Africa, the Middle East, as you would expect. This number is probably low for North America. Probably should be almost twice that. And if you Google how many Muslims are there in the United States, you'll get a range from like 3 million to 12 million. And a lot of that has to do with finding Muslims to ask. A lot of the census forms don't ask about your religion, so it has to be surveys done by groups like Pew Research. And then probably a lot of Muslims don't want to identify as Muslim in North America, especially after 9/11. This chart represents where are those people that are unaffiliated. Of course, China, we talked about some of those issues there. But you see some rather sizable groups in Europe, North America as well. Again, some of those people probably we would classify as being spiritual at the very least. They're just not affiliated with the church. And then also probably a lot of people that would be identified as atheists. This chart kind of gives you an idea of Africa, what's been going on in Africa, right? Because we noted, right, Christianity is growing its presence most in the global south. Well, when you look at this comparison over 110 years, with missionary work really kicking off in the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, there's been a decrease of traditional religions and an increase of Christianity, but also an increase of Islam. Right? With Christianity exponentially growing after 1950. And we'll talk about some of the reasons behind that on Monday. But what really kind of brings it home is by looking at the makeup over the past couple decades and thinking now towards the future. In 1970, this was largely the breakdown of the number of Christians in the world. Around 1.2 billion in 1970. As you can see here, Europe having the most, Latin America and the United States, North America, sizable, some in Asia, some in Africa. Right? Huge numbers, right? By any scope of the imagination, but majority in Europe. Christianity is still a largely European religion. But 40 years later, when Christianity has almost doubled, the number of Christians in Africa more than tripled. In Asia, do my math here quickly, that'd be what? Almost quadrupled. But in the United States, in North America, there were only 70 million Christians. 70 million Christians added. Latin America doubled. Europe, still some growth. And then almost a 10 million increase in Oceania. Oceania would include places like Indonesia, Australia, other places in the Pacific. And so where we see the most growth is in the global south. that it's in South America, it's in Africa. Now, in thinking about where Christianity is going, demographic historians have made some guesses. Now, these are guesses, right? It's one of those, if all things continue as they are going now, here's what it'll look like. But certainly, there's a lot of factors that could happen between there. But if things remain relatively stable, where would Christianity be in the next 40 years? So these statistics come from Philip Jenkins, a historian at Penn State, and Taylor in his book, The Next Christendom. He estimates, or he pulls from statistics that estimate that in those 40 years, there will be another 1 billion Christians added. That, of course, we're seeing Christianity increase. Right? It's not going to decrease in the sense of go down globally, but when you start breaking it down, it does start to get interesting. The estimates are that there will be about 1 billion of those Christians found in Africa. So where African Christians made up about a quarter of the world's population in 2010, it's going to be a third. Almost double again in those 40 years. Asia also increasing, almost doubling. North America still increasing. It's no surprise we still see increasing in North America. Another million added in Latin America. Or excuse me, another 100 million added in Latin America. But in Europe, the trend is towards a decrease in people. Because when you look at this religious scene in Europe, you're seeing more and more people being unaffiliated. Now, the other thing that's also going to affect this is that there are more and more Muslims immigrating into Europe. And so that's going to change some population statistics as well. And then another 10 million added in Oceania. Again, those are guesstimates. They're based off of some reliable information and a good management of trends, but all sorts of things could happen between now and then. Wars, natural disasters, all sorts of things can change a lot of that. But what we see here is the general trend is increase globally, but an increase in certain populations. And a lack of significant increase, or actually a decrease in other trends. There's some more demographics I want to share with you, more that are specific to the United States, that we'll talk about on Monday, and then we'll talk about a general overview of where Catholic Christianity, Protestant Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, where they stand here in the 21st century. So we'll pick that up on